Have you ever felt your heart racing at the promise of a perfect date? That's precisely how I saw myself. An ordinary guy with a cell phone in his hand and an open dating app when I came face to face with Emily. Emily captivated me with her magazine-worthy photos, her silky hair, and her charming smile. Our messages intertwined with jokes and flirtations, her intelligence and quickness making me laugh heartily in the quiet of my room. When she suggested a dinner, I was already daydreaming, imagining a magical night that could change everything. I didn't know I'd be the title character in a comedy of errors where she laughed at my expense. I decided to throw everything in the debut. I chose a fancy Japanese restaurant in Seattle, one of those where the sound of sushi being sliced is almost a symphony, and the smell of wasabi envelops you like a spicy hug. I arrived early, adjusting the tie I borrowed from my roommate and running my fingers through my gel-scented hair. My stomach was pirouetting, but I was ready to impress. Then she arrived. Emily entered as if the world were her stage, a red dress that looked like it was painted on her body, high heels hitting the floor firmly, and a look that left me breathless. "Hi, it's me," she said, in a voice that was honey and mystery. I sat down before her, feeling that the night would be epic. The dinner started out as a modern fairy tale. The menu arrived, and Emily took the reins with the assurance of a queen. "Let's get the sashimi from Toro Tuna," he declared, pointing to the top of the price list. "And wagyu with truffles. You have to try that." I nodded, a little dizzy with her charm, ignoring the slight tightness in my chest as I mentally calculated the bill. The dishes began to arrive, an explosion of colors, flavors, and textures, and she launched into a monologue about her glamorous life. He discussed yacht parties, trips to Tokyo, and a closet that looked like a haute couture museum. I tried to join the dance, telling her about my job as a video editor and my vinyl collection, but she cut me off with an indifferent nod, as if I were an irrelevant detail in her script. Gradually, a strange sensation began to creep into me. Her questions came in bursts, all pointing to the same target. "Do you make a good living from this? Do you live in a big place? Have you ever thought about investing in something else? Sophisticated?" I laughed. I didn't talk, but the discomfort grew like a shadow in the corner of my eye. I tried to pull the conversation to something lighter, a story about the day my cat knocked down my favorite plant. But she interrupted me with, "My last date took me to a Michelin-starred place. Have you ever been?" Dinner went on. The dishes piled up, and I felt more and more like an extra, while she devoured everything with a voracity that didn't match the delicacy of the photos. The final blow struck, a moment that left me desiring to vanish from the world. The waiter brought the bill, a number that looked more like a redemption code than a value, and I, with a lump in my throat, pulled out the card. It was then that Emily leaned over the table, her face lit up by an icy smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Look, I have a confession," she said, her voice low and cutting. "I prefer women. I only came because of the free food." "Thanks, huh?" She laughed, a high-pitched, cruel sound that echoed through the restaurant, picked up her purse, and rolled out, her heels marking her victory on the shiny floor. I stood there, petrified, the card still in my hand, while the waiter approached with a look of pity that burned me deeper than shame. I paid the bill, but the real price was the piece of dignity that Emily took away, laughing, that night in Seattle. It was a quiet afternoon in Chicago, one of those in which the sun hides shy behind gray clouds, and I, an ordinary woman with a heart open to new possibilities, decided to give fate a chance. His name was Daniel, an anonymous face that appeared on my cell phone through a dating app. His profile was basic, almost comforting in its simplicity. Smiling photos, a cute dog, a bio that said, "In love with mysteries." We booked a cafe in the center of the city, a charming little place with brick walls and the smell of roasted beans floating in the air. I arrived in a light dress and a nervous smile, thinking it would be just another chance encounter. But what started as an innocent flirtation soon turned into a nightmare that still echoes in my mind like an insistent whisper. I sat at a table by the window, the fogged glass reflecting my anxious face as I waited. Daniel walked in minutes later, tall and thin, with a look that seemed to cross you. "Hi, it's me," he said, sitting up with an energy that made me slightly uncomfortable. The conversation started light. Work, hobbies, but soon he veered off into dark ground. "Have you ever heard of the case of that missing girl in '98? He asked. his eyes shining with a fascination that didn't match the casual tone. He began to describe macabre details of true crime, each word dripping with sickening excitement. I tried to laugh, to change the subject, but he kept going, his fingers drumming on the table as if he were reliving each scene. "I like to understand what's going on in their heads," he said, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The discomfort grew like a dense fog. Then came the questions. Where do you live exactly? Do you go out alone a lot? Is there someone waiting for you at home? Each one was a harpoon disguised as curiosity, digging deeper into my tranquility. My heart beat fast, but I smiled, trying to maintain the facade of normalcy. "I think I'll get another coffee," I mumbled, standing up with shaky legs. He tilted his head, a crooked smile emerging. "You're not going away yet, are you? We're just beginning our journey together." The tone was playful, but there was something behind it, a veiled promise that made me freeze. I grabbed my coat and said I needed to go, but when I turned to the door, I felt his footsteps behind me. "Wait," he whispered, too quietly, too close. "We need to finish this conversation." I ran out into the street, the cold Chicago air hitting my face as I tried to blend in with the crowd. But he was there, following me, a lingering shadow that wouldn't let go of my trail. My cell phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from him. "Don't run, I just want to talk." Panic rushed down my throat like bile. I turned into a side street, desperate for a hiding place, but the sound of his sneakers on the asphalt reached me like a patter of paranoia. I walked into a narrow alley, the smell of garbage and moisture enveloping me, and I realized too late that it was a mistake. There was no way out. The brick walls rose around me, and there he was, at the entrance, silhouetted against the dim streetlight. "You didn't have to run away," he said, inching forward, his eyes shining like blades in the dim light. My chest tightened, the air thinning as I retreated until I leaned against the cold wall. His slow, deliberate footsteps echoed, each one hammering into my sanity. "What do you want?" I asked, his voice trembling. But he only smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His response was almost sweet, almost human, but there was something broken in it that made me want to scream. "Just understand you," he said. Then, a miracle. The distant sound of sirens cut through the silence. He stopped, his face contorting in an instant of doubt. It was enough. I ran past him, my shoulder brushing against his as I walked back into the streetlight, my heart in my throat. The police later found him, a man with a history of stalking, a predator disguised as an ordinary guy. I escaped, but the psychological terror didn't let go. I went back home, locked the door, but every shadow on the window, every creak on the floor, brought back those cold eyes. He's no longer out there, they say, but in my mind, Daniel still walks behind me, whispering in the darkness, an echo that Chicago will never erase. Have you ever felt those satisfying butterflies in your stomach before a first date, when the possibilities seem endless and the world shines with a tinge of hope? That's how I felt when I set up a dinner with Ryan. Ryan appeared on my dating app with casual photos, amusing messages, and the promise of engaging conversation. We chose a Mexican restaurant in Austin, a vibrant little place with warm lights and the tantalizing aroma of tacos and margaritas. I imagined myself sitting at the table with him, exchanging glances and stories, maybe even feeling that spark that we see in movies. I spent hours getting ready, a flowery dress, earrings that clinked softly, and I left the house light-hearted, ready for a romantic evening. But, oh, how fate loves to play tricks, and tonight left my cheeks on fire with embarrassment. I arrived at the restaurant a little early, the nervousness making me drum my fingers in the bag as I waited. The place was lively, with mariachis playing in the background and the clinking of glasses filling the air. Then I saw Ryan walk in. Tall, messy hair in a charming way, just like in the photos. My heart jumped. But before I could wave, something strange happened. An older woman, with large glasses and a dress with screaming prints, came right behind him and went straight towards me. "Hi, honey," she exclaimed, sitting at our table unceremoniously while Ryan just smiled, a silly smile that left me confused. "That's my mom, Linda," he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world to bring mom on a first date. I blinked, astonished, waiting for an explanation that never came. Dinner began, and any dream of romanticism was crushed like a tortilla under a rolling pin. Linda pulled out the menu and started ordering. Nachos, enchiladas, a whole pitcher of margarita, while I tried to process what was happening. "So, tell me all about yourself," she said, her eyes piercing me behind the lens. Before I could answer, she snapped, "What do you do? Do you live with your parents? How many brothers do you have?" I stammered short answers, feeling the heat rise up my neck, while Ryan just nodded, as if he were the spectator of a show he produced himself. I tried to pull him into the conversation. "And you, Ryan? How was your day?" But Linda cut me off with "He's a sweetheart, right? He was always so dedicated to his family." Her tone was sweet, but there was a pressure there, as if I was being interviewed for a position I didn't even want. The situation only got worse. As the dishes arrived, a mountain of food I barely touched, Linda began to dig deeper. "Do you want children? How many? Have you ever thought about marriage?" she asked, leaning so close that I could smell tequila on her breath. My face burned, and I cast desperate glances at Ryan, begging for a rescue that never came. Ryan simply smiled and fiddled with his cell phone, treating me like a test subject in a social experiment. I don't know yet," I replied, laughing nervously, but she wouldn't stop. "You need to plan these things, honey. Ryan deserves a girl who knows what she wants." The tension was a knot in my stomach, and every question was a punch to my pride. But I swallowed, trying to keep my composure in the face of that surreal interrogation. After an hour that seemed like a century, I couldn't take it anymore. "You know, I'm not feeling very well," I lied, clutching my bag like a life raft. "I think I'm leaving." I stood up, legs wobbly, and Linda frowned. "Already? The night is just beginning." Before I could respond, she began speaking. "It's important that you look after him, you know? He needs a strong woman." I ran to the door, the sound of her voice chasing me like a megaphone. "Think about the wedding, honey!" she shouted as I stumbled out, the fresh Austin air hitting my burning face. I looked back and saw the other customers disguising laughter, some pointing discreetly, and Ryan still there, smiling as if nothing had happened. I was overcome with embarrassment, vowing never to look at him again. Yet the echo of that "marriage, honey" still makes me want to dig a hole and hide for eternity. Imagine a man like me, lonely but with a thread of hope sewn on his chest, navigating the emptiness of a routine life in search of something true. That's how Sophie came into my story, a name that flashed on my phone like a promise. We met on a dating app, and she felt like a gift. Kind messages, easy laughs, and a way to make me feel seen after so long being invisible. We scheduled a coffee date in Portland, a city where the rain reveals secrets and the aroma of artisanal coffee soothes the spirit. I dreamed of more, a dinner, a connection, maybe even a future. But what I found was a distorted mirror that made me doubt everything I thought I knew about myself. Our first meeting was in a small cafe hidden among the humid streets of the city. I arrived early, my sweaty hands clutching a book as a disguise, while the steam from the cups danced around me. Sophie arrived with a smile that lit up the place, her brown hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. "Hi, you're cuter in person," she said, and I felt a warmth rise up my neck. I paid for the coffee, 2 lattes with heart drawings on the foam, and we talked about trivialities, my work as an accountant and her love of old movies. When we said goodbye, she touched my arm and said, "Let's do it again." My heart raced, already planning the next step, not realizing that I was entering a game that I never asked to play. The second meeting was more daring. I took her to a sophisticated Italian restaurant, with candles flickering and the sound of forks jingling against porcelain plates. I ordered a bottle of red wine, truffle ravioli, dessert. Everything to impress her. Sophie smiled, praised the food, but made no mention of splitting the bill. "You're a gentleman," she said, her eyes twinkling in the soft light, and I swallowed the slight annoyance, thinking it was too early to demand reciprocity. The night ended with a quick hug, and I returned home with a lighter pocket, but a heart full of possibilities. She was charming, superficially perfect, and I wanted to believe that her presence was the beginning of something real. The third meeting, however, began to crack the illusion. I chose an unassuming bistro, still in Portland, with worn wooden tables and a simple menu. We were laughing at a story about my boss when the waiter brought the bill, a modest sum compared to previous meetings. I placed her between us, hoping for the first time that she would at least suggest sharing. But Sophie picked up her phone, her fingers dancing on the screen, ignoring the paper as if it were invisible. The waiter hovered there, embarrassed, and I felt a heat rise up my face. "I'll get this one," I muttered, pulling the card, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Then I suggested something different. "How about a dinner at home next time? I cook." She wrinkled her nose, the charm evaporating. "I like to go out and have fun." "You're getting a little petty." The word petty had a sharp edge. "Petty?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "I've paid for everything so far, Sophie. Don't you think it's fair to share a little?" She stared at me, her eyes cold as the wind blowing outside. "If you're going to be like this, we'd better stop here," she said, her voice sharp. I stood up, the blood pulsing in my temples. "Then pay your share of the other meetings if it's so fair." The silence fell heavy, and then came the final blow. Sophie leaned in, her face contorted in contempt. "You're pathetic," he hissed, each syllable a venom that paralyzed me. She grabbed her bag and left, the sound of her heels echoing in the bistro like a cruel endpoint. I stood there alone, the waiter clearing tables at the back while I stared into the void. Money wasn't the problem. It was what she did to me. Sophie used me as a pawn, a plaything on her emotional chessboard, and discarded it without any hesitation. Doubt set in, corrosive and unsettling. Was I naive? Weak? Every memory of the encounters swirled in my head, distorted, as I tried to understand where I went wrong. She had vanished, yet her absence left a void not in her wallet, but in the self-assurance I believed I held. And in that silent bistro, under the weight of the looks I imagined, I swore never again to be the idiot who pays for a fake smile. It was a hot summer night in Denver, the kind of heat that makes the asphalt glow and the air seem laden with secrets. I was in a bar downtown, a cool little place with flashing neon lights and the sound of clinking glasses in the background. It was there that I met Claire. She emerged like a magnet, pulling my gaze from the other side of the counter with a smile that promised more than words. She was a person who was difficult to forget, with dark hair that fell in loose curls and green eyes that sparkled like emeralds. Before our meeting, we had been exchanging messages for days, and her charisma and ability to turn simple sentences into poetry had already captivated me. That night, I expected a light flirtation, perhaps the beginning of something special. However, what I encountered was a profound enigma that continues to haunt me, leaving me with unanswered questions. I sat in a corner of the bar, the cold beer sweating in my hand as I waited. Claire walked in minutes later, a light dress swaying with every step, and the bar seemed to fall silent for a moment. "Hi, it's me," she said, her voice soft as a summer breeze, and sat down beside me with a naturalness that disarmed me. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, exploring topics such as music, mountain sunsets, and the simple joys of life. She laughed at my jokes, tilted her head when I spoke, and I felt that delicious warmth of someone who thinks she found someone special. But then, something changed. She picked up her phone, her gaze dancing between the screen and the environment, a wrinkle of tension appearing on her forehead. "How are you?" I asked, trying to keep the tone light. But she just muttered a, "Yes, of course," which sounded hollow. The weather turned like an unexpected storm. Claire began to fidget with her hands, her eyes now fixed on the door, as if expecting something, or someone. "Have you been here before?" I asked, trying to pull her back. But she replied with a distracted nod, her phone vibrating again. Suddenly, she stood up, her eyes wide. I need to go," she said, her voice trembling. And before I could react, she ran to the exit, her bag pounding against her hip. Instinct overruled reason, prompting me to get up and follow her, intrigued and worried, and my heart pounding as the city's noise engulfed my thoughts. The street was bustling with laughter, and the sound of purring engines, yet Claire effortlessly navigated through the crowd, her hair flowing like a flag of escape. I followed her a few meters away, calling her name, but she didn't look back. "Claire, wait!" I shouted, dodging a group of tourists, sweat running down the back of my neck. She turned a corner, and I ran after her, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the concrete. Then I saw her, standing on the sidewalk, her body rigid, staring at a black car that came out of nowhere, its headlights cutting through the night like hungry eyes. A man was behind the wheel, his face shaded, but his eyes met me, cold and sharp as blades of ice. My blood froze, a shiver running down my spine as I stopped, breathless. Claire hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, and then turned to me. His green eyes, once so alive, were filled with a pure terror, a silent cry that crossed the distance between us. She got into the car, the door slamming with a dry sound, and the vehicle accelerated, its tires squeaking against the asphalt, sending her into the darkness. I stood there, alone on the sidewalk, the noise of the city returning like a muffled roar. I tried to call her the next day, but the number was out of service. When I returned to the app, her profile was no longer visible, as if it had vanished from existence. Days passed, and I relived every second of that night. The driver's gaze, her fear, the emptiness that remained. I researched and asked, but no one knew anything. The police shrugged and said that there was no crime without proof. But I know what I saw. Something sinister engulfed Claire that night. Something she couldn't escape. And now, when I close my eyes, I see those black headlights coming from me. And the mystery of it haunts me. An echo that Denver will never silence. It was a golden afternoon in Boston. The kind of day when the sun slowly says goodbye, tinting the sky orange and purple. And I, a woman looking for a simple moment of connection, accepted Ethan's invitation for a walk in the park. He popped up on my dating app like a breath of fresh air. Fun messages, photos of him climbing mountains, a smile that seemed to promise lightness. "How about enjoying the sunset?" he wrote. And I imagined a quiet walk, perhaps with the sound of rustling leaves and a conversation flowing like the wind. I put on a light coat, put on comfortable boots, and left the house with an open heart, not knowing that the twilight would bring a threat that would be etched on me like an invisible scar. I met Ethan at the entrance to the park, a vast place with winding trails and trees that seemed to whisper ancient stories. He was there, standing, wearing a dark jacket and a look that didn't match the charm of the messages. "Ready to explore?" he said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the sound of the birds quieting down. We started walking, the sun sinking below the horizon, and I expected him to start a conversation. Something about the day, the weather, anything. But Ethan was silent, his steady steps guiding me along wide paths where families still walked. I tried to break the silence, talking about my love of photography, but he just nodded, his eyes fixed in front of me, as if I were an echo he didn't need to hear. The discomfort started creeping into me, but I told myself it was just nervousness from a first date. So, he changed course. "Let's go this way," he murmured, pointing to a narrow path that snaked through the trees, away from the voices and laughter. The sky was already darkening, the shadows stretching like hungry fingers, and I hesitated. "Isn't it isolated?" I asked, laughing to disguise the chill down my spine. He turned, his face half illuminated by the last ray of light, and said, "It's more beautiful this way." There was something about his tone, a cold, almost predatory certainty, that made my stomach twitch. But I followed him, the branches brushing my arms, the sound of the city disappearing behind us. Each step seemed to take me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't name. His silence now a weight that choked the air. The trail became darker, the ground covered with damp leaves that muffled our steps. I tried to speak again. "Do you come here a lot?" But he ignored it, his shoulders tense, as if he were listening to something I couldn't. The park stood empty, the trees encircling us like a living prison. "Ethan, maybe we should go back," I said, his voice trembling. But he stopped and pointed to an even darker corner, where the light barely penetrated. "It's right there," he replied, his eyes fixed on me for the first time, shining with an intensity that made me retreat. Fear took over, an icy wave that rose up my legs. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew I needed to get out of there now. We were alone, the air heavy with a silence that seemed to scream. My heart pounded intensely, and I sensed, not by hearing, but by feeling, that something was amiss. "I'll be back," I declared, turning around. But before I could take a step, he said, "Stay." His command, not a request, pierced the air with its sharp sound. Panic exploded in me, and I ran. My boots smashed the ground, the sound of my footsteps echoing like a muffled scream against the trees. Despite my inability to look back, the weight of his gaze followed me, an unseen presence that made my skin tingle. I ran until I reached a lighted area where couples were strolling and children were laughing, and only then did I stop, panting, my hands trembling. When I finally dared to look, he wasn't there. But in the dim light of the trail, I swear, I saw something. Two dots glowing, eyes that didn't blink, staring at me from the darkness. He didn't follow me, but the horror remained. I returned home, locked the door, but sleep did not come easy. In my dreams, those eyes come back, promising something I don't understand, a terror that Boston buried in the shadows of that park. Even though Ethan is no longer with me, his legacy continues to haunt and wait. Have you ever felt the glow of someone pulling you like a moth into the flame, knowing that you might get burned but unable to resist? That's how I saw myself, an ordinary guy with a silly heart, when Megan, the star of our office, invited me to a night out at a nightclub in Miami. She was the kind of woman everyone wanted, beautiful, confident, with a laugh that echoed like music. As a quiet graphic designer, it filled me with immense joy to think that she, of all people, had taken notice of me. I spent the week dreaming about that night, imagining how I could impress her under the flashing lights and pulsating sound. I chose my best shirt, rehearsed lines in the mirror, and left home with my chest inflated with hope. But what I experienced was such a public humiliation that I still feel the heat of shame rising up my neck just remembering it. I arrived at the club early, the hot Miami air mixed with the smell of sweat and expensive perfume. The place was vibrant chaos. The bass shook the floor, neon lights cut through the darkness, and bodies moved in a frenzied dance. I was nervous, but when Megan showed up, everything stopped for a second. She looked stunning, a tight black dress, loose hair swaying like waves, and a smile that promised trouble. "You came!" she shouted over the song, pulling me into a hug that made my heart race. We went to the bar, and she ordered shots of tequila, tapping the glass on the counter before flipping the liquid with a laugh. I followed, feeling the alcohol burn my throat, trying to look as cool as she was. Then, out of nowhere, she leaned over and kissed me. A warm, quick kiss that made me dizzy. "This night will be epic," she said. And I believed it, blinded by her brilliance. But the fairy tale turned into a quick nightmare. Megan dragged me onto the dance floor, her body moving with an energy I could barely follow. For a brief moment, her hands rested on my shoulders, her hips brushed against mine, and I felt a sense of dominance. But then she turned around, her eyes catching another guy in the crowd, a tall, muscular guy with a predatory grin. She danced with him, teasing him with his hands on her waist, while I stood there, swaying awkwardly and trying not to look foolish. The crowd ignored me, a sea of bodies that didn't see the heat rising up my face. "She's simply enjoying herself," I reassured myself, suppressing the growing jealousy in my throat. But Megan wouldn't stop. She flirted with one, then another, laughing loudly as I became a forgotten accessory, an extra at her private party. I tried to throw myself into the dance, to imitate her rhythm, but it was useless. She swirled between the guys like a queen picking out subjects, and I was the jester, sweating in a shirt that no longer looked cool. "Want one more drink?" I shouted, desperate for a rescue, but she barely heard me, her eyes fixed on a new target. I struggled to control the storm of jealousy and shame. I wanted to be the cool guy, who doesn't care, but every laugh she had with another was a slap in my face. The nightclub swirled around me, the lights flashing like flashes from a movie, and I had no lines, so I decided to have enough. I was going to talk to her, win her back, or at least leave with an ounce of dignity. But the final blow came before I could act. Walking to the corner of the track, I saw her, Megan leaning against the wall, her lips glued to those of somebody I didn't even recognize. The sound of the music muffled my anger, but not the weight on my chest. She saw me, our eyes met, and she laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the air like glass. "Relax, it's just fun," she shouted, as the person laughed along, looking at me like I was an insect. The crowd around began to notice, heads turning, whispers drowned out by giggles. I stumbled out the door, the humid Miami air hitting my warm face, the pitying glances following me like spotlights. My exit was a parade of embarrassment, each step echoing her laugh in my head. Megan stood there, the untouchable queen, as I scrambled to pieces, questioning whether she would ever be worth anything in the eyes of someone like her. Have you ever experienced a promising night's comfort transform into an enigmatic, inexplicable force that defies explanation? That's how I saw myself, an ordinary woman looking for a moment of peace, when I booked a dinner with Noah at a French restaurant in San Diego. Noah's profile popped up on my dating app as a compelling riddle. Pictures of an angular face, messages that mixed humor and mystery, and a dinner invitation that seemed innocent. I envisioned a serene evening filled with soft lights, the scent of warm croissants, and a soul-warming conversation. I chose a simple blue dress, tied my hair in a sloppy bun, and left the house with a shy smile, unaware that I was about to cross paths with a troubled mind that saw me as something far beyond a passing companion. The restaurant was a charming retreat, with stone walls and candles flickering on antique chandeliers. I arrived early, my heart beating a little faster as I sat at a table by the window. A few minutes later, Noah arrived, tall and thin, his brown eyes seeming to engulf me completely. "You're even more beautiful in person," he said, his deep voice echoing over the clinking of glasses. I smiled, flattered, and we ordered an onion soup for me, a steak au poivre for him. The conversation started lightly. He discussed his work as a programmer, and I told him about my hobby of painting watercolors. But soon his compliments began to flow, intensely, almost feverishly. "Your hair is perfect," he said, leaning over the table. "Your eyes have a light I've never seen." The tone was sweet, but there was a weight there, something that made me move uncomfortably in the chair. As the dishes arrived, the discomfort grew. Noah couldn't stop looking at me, his eyes fixed as if he was memorizing my every stroke. "You remind me of someone," he said, almost in a whisper. And I laughed, trying to ease the tension. "An ex?" I asked jokingly. He shook his head, his gaze distant. "My sister. She was special. Like you." The comparison surprised me, its peculiar tone resonating in the atmosphere like a tinkling bell. I tried to change the subject, talking about the wine, but he returned to the topic, his fingers drumming on the table. "She had delicate hands like yours. I always thought I needed to protect her." The possessive tone made me gulp, and I felt a chill rise down my spine, as if something invisible had entered the restaurant with me. Dinner followed, but his every word was a thread that tightened the knot in my stomach. He began asking questions: where I lived, whether I lived alone, what I did at night, all disguised as casual curiosity, but charged with an intention I would rather not name. "Have you ever felt that someone was made for you?" he asked, his eyes shining with sickening certainty. I laughed nervously and said it was too early to think so, but he leaned closer, his hot breath against my face. "I know you're that person. I've been looking for you for so long." My heart raced, panic whispering in the back of my mind, but I kept my smile, trying to pretend everything was okay while planning an outing. When the bill arrived, he insisted on paying, his fingers brushing against mine as he picked up the card. "I'll take you home," he said, and I declined, making up an excuse about taking an Uber. He frowned but didn't argue. I left quickly, the fresh San Diego air hitting my sweaty face as I walked to my apartment building a few blocks away. But the relief was short-lived. I heard footsteps behind me, firm, fast, and when I looked, there he was, Noah, following me in the distance, his face shaded under the streetlights. As I ran the final few meters, my hands trembling with keys, I entered the building and locked the apartment door, my heart pounding. I thought I had escaped, but the night still held its final blow. Hours later, already in my pajamas, I heard knocks on the door. Strong, insistent, like a hammer in my mind. "It's me, Noah," he said on the other end, his voice low and firm. "I just want to make sure you're safe." Panic engulfed me completely. I ran to the bedroom, hiding in the darkest corner, cell phone in hand as I dialed the police with trembling fingers. The knocks continued, each echoing like a scream inside my skull, and his words repeated, "You need me to protect you. I know what's best for you." The air felt thick, suffocating, and I was barely breathing, praying that he would give up. So, silence. The silence was so profound that it caused pain. I peeked out the window. He was down there in the street, looking at the building, his eyes fixed on my window as if he could see me through the curtains. Sirens cut through the night, and I saw the blue and red lights approaching. The police took him away, handcuffed, as he shouted my name, his voice echoing in the empty street. They told me later, Noah had a history, a trail of obsessions that ended in locked doors and shattered lives. Despite his departure, the psychological terror persisted. I locked everything and turned off the lights, but I didn't sleep. Every shadow in the corner of the room seemed to move. Every creak of the building made me think he was coming back. Its fixation marked me, an invisible weight that I carry, keeping me awake, dreading the day when those brown eyes might meet me again on the streets of San Diego. Have you ever felt the charm of someone pulling you in like a soft melody, only to realize that the notes hide a dissonant tone that you don't explain? That's how I saw myself, an ordinary guy with a curious heart, when I met Lila at a bistro in Minneapolis. Lila's appearance on my dating app was refreshing. She had discreet photos, a bio that discussed photography and dreams of traveling, and shy messages that made me smile. We scheduled a dinner, and I imagined a simple evening. Good food, light laughter, maybe a walk to stretch the moment. The promise of his shyness captivated me as I arrived at the bistro with a well-pressed shirt and butterflies in my stomach. But a walk in the park later revealed a side of her that left me trapped in a psychological labyrinth, questioning not only who she was, but who I could be. The bistro was a cozy place, with wooden walls and the smell of fresh herbs wafting through the air. I sat at a table by the window, the glass reflecting off the streetlights as I waited. Lila arrived on time, a simple blue dress highlighting her fair skin, her dark hair falling over her shoulders like a curtain. "Hi, it's me," she said, her soft voice almost lost in the murmur of the place. We ordered. Me, a chicken and lemon sauce, she, a mushroom risotto, and the conversation started slowly. She talked about her work in marketing and her love of capturing the world in photos, and I told her about my job in a bookstore and my love of hiking. His green eyes studied me, shy but attentive, and I felt a pleasant warmth, thinking that maybe something special was born there. After dinner, the fresh Minneapolis air called us. "How about a walk in the park?" she suggested, and I accepted, imagining a quiet evening. The park was an oasis in the city, with paths lit by old lampposts and the distant sound of a stream. We walked side by side, the comfortable silence punctuated by light exchanges, favorite movies, places we wanted to visit. But then, something changed. Lila began to ask questions, her tone changing from curious to cutting. "How many girlfriends have you had?" she asked, her eyes fixed on me. I replied with a laugh, telling me about 2 exes, but she pressed, "Why did you break up? Do you still talk to them?" The tension grew, and I tried to joke. "I guess I'm too open a book." But she stood away, her shoulders stiff, as if she heard something I didn't say. The sky darkened. The stars began to dot the horizon, and Lila quickened her pace. "Have you ever felt someone watching you?" she muttered, almost to herself, her eyes sweeping the park. I tried to keep up, confused. "No. Why?" I inquired. But she remained silent, her shoes rapidly hitting the pavement. "Lila, are you okay?" I called, panting, but she pointed to the parking lot in the distance, where my gray car was parked. "I've noticed that car before," she said, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with dread. "You're following me, aren't you?" The shock paralyzed me. "What? No, we just met," I protested, but she shook her head, her face contorted as if I were a dangerous stranger. My stomach tightened, my mind spinning as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The night grew colder, the wind whispering through the trees, and Lila began to walk even faster, almost running. "I know what you want," she muttered, the words coming out in bursts. "You watched me before. I saw that car." I raised my hands, trying to calm her down. "Lila, your behavior is crazy. I swear I didn't know you before today." However, my words were ineffective against the overwhelming force. She stopped suddenly, turning to face me, her face lit up by the dim light of a streetlight. "You want to hurt me," she shouted, her voice cutting through the night like a knife, her green eyes now wild, filled with a fear that made no sense. Before I could answer, she ran, disappearing into the darkness of the park, the sound of her footsteps echoing until she was lost in the distance. I stood there, alone, the silence of the park falling on me like a shroud. My heart pounded, her words cutting deep. "You want to hurt me." Each syllable a thorn I couldn't pull out. What had happened? Was she paranoid, lost in a delirium? Or had I, without knowing it, done something to trigger it? I looked at my car in the distance, an ordinary object that now looked like a silent accuser. Afterwards, I attempted to contact her, but the blocked number prevented me from doing so. Her profile on the app disappeared, as if it had never existed. I returned home, the silence of the night amplifying my confusion, and I sat in the dark with the echo of her voice in my head. Did she see a monster in me that I don't know? Or was she the enigma, a broken mind that dragged me into her chaos? In Minneapolis, the park holds the secret, and I stand here, lost between what I saw and what I fear to be. It was a warm afternoon in Nashville, the kind of day when the air seems to stick to the skin, and the sound of distant guitars wafts through the streets like an invitation. I, an ordinary woman with a heart full of timid hopes, walked into a cafe with butterflies in my stomach, ready to meet James. James had popped up on my dating app as a breath of promise. His photos displayed a warm smile that lit up the screen. His kind messages made me laugh to myself, and his invitation to coffee felt like the start of something good. I chose a light blouse and jeans, let my hair fall over my shoulders, and walked there with a hesitant smile, imagining an afternoon of easy conversation and looks that might say more. But what I found was a threat that seeped into my bones, a silent horror that turned a chance encounter into a nightmare that still haunts me. The cafe was a charming little place, with exposed brick walls and the smell of espresso wafting like a hug. I arrived early, sitting at a table by the window, the glass reflecting the sun as I nervously fiddled with my bag. James walked in minutes later, tall and broad-shouldered, the smile in the photos lighting up his face in a way that made me relax for a moment. "Hi, it's me," he said, his voice deep but soft, sitting up with a confidence that felt natural. We ordered, a cappuccino for me, a black coffee for him, and the conversation started lightly. He discussed his career in finance, I shared my teaching experiences, and we shared small moments of laughter, such as the unwavering tune of street musicians. However, I couldn't ignore the cold glow emanating from his eyes, as if he was looking directly into my soul. Then, the tone changed, subtle but cutting. "I just got out of a long relationship," he said, stirring the coffee with a spoon, his gaze fixed on the cup. "Too bad. Breakups are hard," I replied, trying to empathize. But he looked up, and what I saw made me freeze. "She thought she could leave me," he said, his voice icy, each word dripping like water in a dark basement. "Sometimes people need a lesson to understand." The smile returned, but it was crooked and empty, and my stomach turned. I tried to laugh, hoping it was a macabre joke, but he leaned forward, his fingers squeezing the spoon tightly. "You've ever had to teach someone to stay, huh?" she asked, her eyes holding me like hooks, a frightening intensity that made my skin crawl. My heart raced, fear creeping beneath the surface like something alive. I kept a smile, fiddling with the cappuccino as my mind screamed to run. "No, I'm more of a letting go," I said, his voice cracking, and he laughed, a dry sound that cut through the air like shattering glass. "You're special," he said, his gaze fixed on my face, his dark eyes glowing with something I would rather not name. I like women like that. Every word was a weight, and I felt the space between us shrinking, the air thickening with a terror I couldn't explain. He went back to talking about his ex, the vague but threatening sentences. She didn't know what was best for her, and I planned my escape. My brain racing as I tried to appear calm. "Have you ever thought about how easy it is for someone to disappear around here?" he whispered, almost casually. And I swallowed hard, the coffee now bitter in my mouth. Fear was an icy current running through my veins, and I knew I had to get out of there. The hours seemed to drag on endlessly, with each sentence further challenging my sanity. "I have an appointment early," I finally lied, standing up with trembling legs. "I'm going." He stood up too, the smile returning. But there was a shadow there, something dark that didn't leave his face. He said, "I'll see you around," and I nodded, turning to the door with my heart pounding. But before he could escape, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the flesh with a force that hurt. "I'll see you again," he whispered, his hot breath against my ear, his tone a promise of horror that made my blood run cold. I pulled my arm tightly, almost tripping, and ran outside, the hot Nashville air hitting my sweaty face as I ran to the car. I locked the doors, my hands shaking so hard that the key fell out twice before starting the engine. I called my friend Sarah on the way, crying as I told her everything, his voice still echoing in my mind like a muffled scream. That night I searched online, and what I found made me cringe. Forums full of warnings about James, obsessive messages, stalking, a woman he followed home. He was a predator, and I had narrowly escaped. I locked everything and turned off the lights, but sleep didn't come. My nightmares are now filled with that sadistic smile. His eyes meeting me in the darkness, a promise Nashville can't erase. Have you ever meticulously planned something that appeared flawless, only for the universe to ridicule and completely alter everything? That's precisely how I felt when I booked a romantic weekend with Olivia in Asheville. She was a pixel-shaped dream on my dating app. Messy blonde hair, a smile that promised adventure, and messages that made me count down the days until I saw her. I envisioned a perfect escape, a charming mountain town, a cozy Airbnb, and 2 days to get to know each other better. I spent hours choosing the car's playlist, packing my suitcase with my best jacket, and dreaming of moments that could become stories to tell. However, what I encountered was a series of embarrassing events that resembled a tragic comedy, culminating in an ending that made me laugh heartily at my misfortune. It all started with the trip. I picked up Olivia on Saturday morning, the sun shining over Asheville as we tossed our bags in the trunk. She was radiant in a light dress, laughing at my crude jokes as we drove down the winding roads, the radio playing songs we sang together. "This will be wonderful," she said, and I believed her, her heart light with the promise of a perfect weekend. We arrived at the Airbnb, a charming cottage with views of the mountains, a welcome bottle of wine waiting for us at the table. We explored the city in the afternoon, strolling through handicraft shops and breathing in the fresh air, our hands rubbing against each other from time to time. I felt a tingle in my chest, thinking that maybe she was someone special, but the night brought chaos, and my romantic dream turned into a circus of embarrassment. We decided to dine at a trendy restaurant with outdoor seating and the starry sky above us as we ate juicy burgers toasted with cold beer. Afterward, Olivia suggested a bar that the Airbnb host recommended, a pulsating place with live music and a crowded dance floor. "Let's dive in," she shouted, pulling me inside, and I went, excited by her energy. At the bar, she ordered cocktail after cocktail, mojitos, margaritas, something purple that glowed in the dark, drinking them like she was in a competition. I tried to keep up at first, but I soon saw that I needed to stay sober to maintain control. Olivia, however, had no limits. She laughed too loudly, tripped over her feet, and conversed with the bartender as if they were old friends, while I stood there, trying not to look like the annoying guy with the bag. The thing really went wrong on the dance floor. Olivia danced with a sense of urgency, her arms twirling and her dress soaring dangerously. I attempted to match her rhythm, but she had already lost her balance, yelling the incorrect lyrics to the song and tumbling into people. "Time to go?" I suggested, grabbing her by the arm as she almost fell, but she shook her head. "One last drink," he insisted, and I relented, thinking it couldn't get any worse. I made a big mistake. As she exited the bar, she unexpectedly collided with a massive security guard, a man whose features appeared etched in stone. Instead of apologizing, Olivia turned around with her eyes blazing and tried to hit him with a clumsy slap that barely grazed his chest. She shouted, "You are not my boss," while I intervened and apologized profusely to the security guard. Fortunately, the security guard took pity on us and sent us away. Returning to Airbnb was a nightmare. Olivia kicked her shoes in the middle of the street, singing loudly and stumbling as I ran after her, carrying her heels like a war trophy. At the cottage, she ran to the bathroom and threw up everything. The cocktails, dinner, probably even breakfast. I attempted to suppress my laughter at the unfortunate situation we found ourselves in, as I held her hair and used a towel to wipe her face. She murmured, "You're an angel," before collapsing on the bed, oozing with tequila and embarrassment. I thought the worst was over, so I threw myself next to her, exhausted, and slept. But the universe had one more blow in store. I woke up at dawn to a strange noise, a liquid, unmistakable sound. In the dim light, I saw Olivia standing in a corner of the room, urinating on the carpet as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I was paralyzed, my brain refusing the scene, until she returned to bed, oblivious, snoring seconds later. With a sigh that was half anger, half resignation, I got up and grabbed the cleaning products from the closet. I spent half an hour scrubbing the carpet, the sour smell making me choke as I tried to save the Airbnb warehouse. In the morning, Olivia woke up with a monumental hangover, her eyes swollen and her voice hoarse. "What happened?" she moaned, and I told him, sparing no details, the slap on the security guard, the vomit, the pee on the floor. She blushed, muttering, "Sorry, I overreacted," Her embarrassed gaze met mine. The smell still hung in the air, with the damp carpet seeming to accuse me. I couldn't stand it. Then, unexpectedly, I started laughing. A loud, absurd laugh that echoed in the cottage. "You're a disaster," I said. And she laughed too, faintly but sincerely. The weekend ended there, on a note of comic embarrassment that sealed the end of any romanticism, but gave me a story that I will never forget. Liam and the Spooky Cafe. It was a frosty afternoon in Philadelphia, the gray sky weighing down the city like a leaden curtain, and I, a woman longing for a simple, uncomplicated moment, scheduled an appointment with Liam for coffee. A glimmer of promise appeared on my Rapidity app. Photos of a striking face with deep brown eyes, short yet charming messages, and an invitation to a casual date. I imagined a quiet break, the warm smell of coffee, a light conversation that might bring a smile. I put on a thick sweater and comfortable boots and left the house with butterflies in my stomach, not knowing that I was about to fall into a trap of obsession that would mark me like a scream stuck in my throat. The cafe was a small, cozy place, with dark wood walls and the muffled sound of an espresso machine in the background. I arrived early, choosing a table by the window, the fogged glass reflecting my anxious face as I adjusted my sweater. Liam walked in minutes later, tall and thin, his brown eyes meeting me with an intensity that made me hesitate. "You're prettier in person," he said, his deep voice cutting through the air as he sat with a stiff posture. We ordered a latte for me, a black coffee for him, and the conversation began. He inquired about my day as a freelance writer, and when I mentioned my love for books, his tone abruptly changed to one of sharpness. "You want a serious future, don't you?" he asked. Barely 5 minutes after we sat down, his eyes shining with a determination that caught me off guard. "Future? We barely know each other," I replied, laughing to lighten the weight. But he leaned over the table, his fingers squeezing the cup. "I can tell when someone is right for me," he said, his voice firm, almost a growl. "You are that person." My heart jumped, the air thickening as I stirred the latte, the warmth of the drink contrasting with the ice that rose up my spine. I tried to dodge. "Do you always come here?" But he cut me off. "Don't change the subject. We have a connection, don't you see?" The sparkle in his eyes was sickly, a flame that burned too hot, and I felt the panic start to creep in. Fear took shape, a knot that tightened my chest. "Look, I just came for a coffee," I said, my voice trembling, standing up with my purse in my hand. But Liam rose to his feet, blocking my path, his eyes sparking with a determination that made me retreat against my chair. "You're not leaving," he said, grabbing my arm tightly, his fingers digging into the skin like claws. "We are destined to be together." The surrounding cafe was gone, the other customers, the noise, everything, and only he remained, the wild gaze holding me like a chain. "Let me go," I ordered, pulling on his arm, but he squeezed tighter, his crooked smile showing. "You'll understand soon," he whispered, and terror exploded inside me, an icy wave that left me breathless. My mind was spinning, looking for a way out. "I need the bathroom," I lied, my voice almost a whisper, and he hesitated, letting go of me with a grunt. I ran there, locking the door, my hands shaking as I texted my friend, "Call now, emergency." The phone rang seconds later, and I answered, screaming loud enough for him to hear. "What? Okay, I'm going right away." I went back to the table, my face pale, and said, "My friend has fallen. I have to go." Liam frowned, but I didn't wait. I ran for the door, the cold Philadelphia air hitting my sweaty face as I stumbled to the car. I was on the verge of reaching safety when I heard his footsteps, swift and intense. I locked myself inside the car, my hands shaking on the key. And then he emerged, banging the window with his fists, his face contorted with rage. "You're mine!" he shouted, his voice cutting across the silent street, his eyes burning with a fury that echoed in my ears like thunder. The engine roared as I accelerated, the sound of his beats fading behind me. I stopped at my friend's house, crying as I told her everything. But even though I was safe, the terror remained. I blocked Liam and deleted the app, but his voice, that scream, still resonates with me. A warning of eternal horror that Philadelphia can't silence. Have you ever felt that delicious expectation before a first date, when the world seems full of possibilities and you can barely sit still? That's how I saw myself. An ordinary guy with a cell phone in his hand, waiting for Tyler at an ice cream parlor in Orlando. It had appeared on my dating app as a breath of normalcy. Photos of a relaxed smile, messages about trails and dogs, an invitation to a frozen yogurt that seemed perfect for a light afternoon. I imagined a quiet conversation, maybe a few laughs, the ice cream melting in my mouth as we got to know each other. I put on a polo shirt, put gel on my hair, and arrived at the place with a silly smile, ready for something casual. But what I found was a figure so eccentric that it left me speechless, in a scene of absurd embarrassment that still makes me blush just remembering it. The ice cream parlor was a colorful spot in Orlando's sticky heat, with walls painted pink and the sweet smell of vanilla wafting in the air. I arrived early, grabbing an outdoor table, the sun beating down on the awning as I drummed my fingers in anticipation. The place was lively, families laughing, kids running around with cones, and I felt in the mood, imagining Tyler walking in with that smile from the photos. But then I heard a sound that didn't fit, the loud clicking of heels on the pavement. I looked up and saw something that took me a few seconds to process. A tall figure in a bright red dress covered in sequins was coming toward me, the blonde hair of a giant wig swaying like a cloud of cotton candy. Long false nails glistened in the sun, and a pair of false eyelashes flapped like butterfly wings. "Hi, love, it's me, Tiffany," she exclaimed, her deep voice echoing as she gave me 2 kisses in the air before I could blink. I gaped, my mind spinning as I tried to connect this flamboyant drag queen to the Tyler I was expecting. "Tyler?" I stammered, and she laughed, a loud sound that made heads turn. "Tyler, Tiffany, whatever, darling. Let's get some fabulous yogurt." Before I could react, she pulled me in, her heels hitting the floor like drums. Despite the discomfort creeping up my neck, I persevered, believing it might be a humorous situation that would soon provide an explanation. In line, Tiffany dominated the scene, ordering a strawberry frozen yogurt with a mountain of toppings, sprinkles, marshmallows, chocolate chips, while I grabbed a simple vanilla one, trying not to look the most out of place in the world. "Have you ever tasted this one with edible glitter?" she asked, pointing with a fingernail that nearly knocked over the attendant's bowl. "It's everything in life." We sat at our table, and the show went on. Tiffany started talking about makeup. "You need eyeliner to rock, love," while trying to eat the yogurt with those absurd nails. The ice cream ran down her fingers, dripping on the table, and she licked it all with a naturalness that made me cringe in my chair. She threw the wig back with a theatrical gesture, causing more glitter to pour in my direction and nearly dip into the candy. I tried to strike up a conversation about the things Tyler had mentioned online. "You like hiking, don't you?" But she waved her hand full of rings. "Trails? Honey, I'm ready to hit the stage. Let's talk about tucking. Have you tried it?" The discomfort turned into a ball in my stomach, each exaggerated gesture of her sinking me deeper into a sea of shame, as the people around me began to stare. I tried to keep up, laughing nervously, but it was like chasing a tornado. Tiffany sang snippets of pop songs between spoonfuls, using the glass as a microphone, and I felt the eyes of the families judging me, or worse, laughing. "Have you ever been on a drag show?" she asked, her eyelashes flapping so fast they almost ventilated the table. "It's my life." I tried to be polite. "No, but it sounds fun." But the discomfort grew, a wave I didn't know how to surf. "Let's go to a show downtown," she announced after a seemingly endless half hour. "You're going to love it." My brain screamed no, and I muttered, "I have to wake up early tomorrow. Better not." Her expression abruptly shifted from joy to a grimace. "Really? You're losing the greatest queen in this city." Before I could explain myself, Tiffany stood up, the chair falling with a bang that silenced the place. "You don't deserve my glow," she shouted, picking up the rest of the yogurt and pouring it on her head, the pink liquid running down her dress and dripping onto the floor. "I'm the greatest queen in Orlando, and you missed this chance," she bellowed, spinning in her heels and coming out like a soap opera diva, her wig catching on the door and flying backwards in a dramatic last act. She grabbed the wig and marched down the street, leaving a trail of glitter and shame. I stood there, covered in splashes, the silence of the ice cream parlor broken by a child asking, "Why did the clown throw ice cream on his head?" Laughter erupted, the stares burning me as I finished my melted yogurt in record time and rushed home, my face hot and ego in tatters.